2017. Is this going to be the year that Lyme activists, chronic fatigue, and Gulf War illness activists finally get anywhere? The essential campaign that we have, of course, is that the CDC knows that there are, and the NIH too, they know that there are this whole multi-million person pandemic of immune suppression outcomes. God only knows how many with Lyme, but we know something like 4 million people in the United States have chronic fatigue syndrome. 8 million have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia to varying degrees of disability, but mostly they're disabled, too fatigued to work, too cognitively impaired. And we don't know how many people there are who have Lyme in this country who are disabled because no accurate records have been kept after 1994. And so people ask me, all the time, what can we do? What can we do? How is this going to be resolved? And I keep saying, well, it'll never get into the mainstream media. There is a media blackout about exactly what happened, how the very same people who falsified the case definition are the ones who own the patents for the tick-borne disease products, such as vaccines and test kits, who are the very same people who approved their bogus non-vaccine Lymerix in 1998 at the FDA. So that's essentially the crime of narrowing the case definition for Lyme disease so as to sell tick-borne diseases test kits and vaccines, while chronic fatigue syndrome patients have suffered research fraud too at the hands of Suzanne Vernon, who allegedly was looking for mycoplasma to see if that was a contributor to fatigue. We know it is because their former name is erythrozoa. They adhere to red blood cells, depolarizing the red blood cell membrane such that oxygen can't then cross, and they're elsewhere within cells, messing up mitochondrial function and so forth. So that's two contributors to fatigue by mycoplasma. But Suzanne Vernon did a so-called study where she took some blood, centrifuged it all down. Now, what a centrifuge does is take anything of weight or mass, spins it out towards the bottom, and what's left at the top is called the supernatant, and that's supposed to be, free of like whole cells and so forth. So what she did was she centrifuged out all these cells, including the mycoplasma, poured the liquid off the top, and said, and assayed that for mycoplasma DNA and found no mycoplasma. So Suzanne Vernon committed research fraud to prove, allegedly, that there's no mycoplasma in the blood of chronic fatigue patients contributing to their fatigue. So they've got research fraud going on. Same thing with Gulf War illness. Oddly, Simon Wesley was hired by the Pentagon to determine if there is any association to vaccines with the occurrence of chronic Gulf War illness, and he found that yes, there was such an association. Then the very same fellow, Simon Wesley, put out all kinds of papers and gave all kinds of talks and lectures and wrote about how Gulf War illness wasn't due to anything other than psychological influences or fear or stress. So what he was essentially saying was that these soldiers were not sick, they're just cowards, and that cowardice is causing them to think they're ill. So these are the kinds of things that we're facing. Additionally, we know that the problem with the autism vaccines is that these vaccines are given too early, too young, too many, not vetted. Same thing with Gulf War illness veterans' vaccines. We don't know what they got whacked with. We hear there was a bogus anthrax vaccine, untested really out there at the time, or else it was the wrong one, and they were used as guinea pigs for that. The medical community, the NIH, the CDC know that there's an association between contaminated vaccines, or vaccines contaminated with fungi, and that's the reason they put mercury in there, to prevent fungi. Because if you co-inject current model of the neurodevelopmental damage that's called autism these days. So all of those groups have something in common. You also shouldn't vaccinate a child who's got a cold or something. And the IDSA, the Infectious Diseases Society of America, agrees with this. Too many vaccines, they're not vetted properly, they're given to the babies too young, they're associated with sudden infant death syndrome, all these things. They've published, they've said these things. So we know all these things. We have the scientific substantiation, or rather, the science told us what was going on. And people want to know, what can we do going forward? We're not going to get it in the media. The journalists said, I know, except for one, Hulk Noble, don't understand it. They, however many times I've explained it to them or sent them the proofs, here, chronic Lyme is not about chronic spirochetes or co-infections. If the OSPE vaccine, being a fungal toxin, caused the same immunosuppression outcome, they'll never publish that. So you can write them off. And the government, our experience with the government is that, if you go there to lobby, and you tell them these things, this will be the first time they've heard it. In other words, Chris Smith, the congressman from New Jersey, his staff has never heard about the Dearborn event. We lobbied in June of 2015, showed them the Dearborn booklet, said, here's what this is saying. All these guys, these 11 labs, nobody agreed with Alan Steer's proposal. Here's how we developed it. The ELISA wasn't even a part of the earlier testing. He raised the cutoff arbitrarily to exclude all neurologic cases, knowing that the neurologic cases were not HLA linked, that only the arthritis cases were hypersensitivity or too many antibodies results, and they falsified the vaccine throughout all the vaccine damage cases and said, if you're sick after getting the vaccine, we'll call that unconfirmed Lyme. We don't know what you have, the classic line that they use for Lyme victims. And so they falsified the vaccine too. We found that Chris Smith's office had never heard of any of this. These are the ones that Pat Smith's Lyme Disease Association and the LDA or LymeDisease.org, that's who they've been working with. All along, that crew in Congressman Smith's office had never heard any of this. So the nonprofits are not competent to telling the story, and they have no desire to. The latest thing is that the LymeDisease.org or the California Lyme Association or the Lyme Association that Phyllis Mervine and Lorraine Johnson run, they're calling it my data, and they're calling that big data. You fill out a form, take a survey of your symptoms, and you give that to us, and oh, by the way, you can make a donation at the same time. In other words, you can buy your story to be given to them, which is ridiculous. And not only that, it's not real data. Real data has to be controlled, it has to be compared to, double blind, controlled, compared to people who don't have these things. There has to be real physiological markers. You can't take a survey of anything. That's not how science works. It's not about personal testimony. It's about hard scientific evidence that's repeatable. And so it turns out the Lyme Disease Association is only doing this big data hoax to get money to come in, because they know it's not real data. I mean, Lorraine Johnson is a lawyer, right? She should know something about hearsay versus valid evidence. You've all watched TV shows, TV shows, Law and Order and things like that. They have to provide evidence of who did what. And they get an expert up there, and the expert tells what's his experience, and he'll say, well, there's a 1 in 20 million chance that this DNA comes from some other person. That's what's valid right there. You have to show how your data is unique and separate from, and you have to verify the method that you use. So that's what some of the nonprofits do. Another thing they'll do is similar along the same lines is tell us your stories, and don't focus on the science, just tell us your stories. And we don't like how the science is presented to us. We think it's, quote, harsh. Or we don't like the way you say what's true. These people are all, millions and millions, easily 20 million crime victims who have chronic fatigue syndrome, Lyme, Gulf War illness. They don't like how we say you're crime victims. We don't like how we say it, which is the same way cops and prosecutors say it in the court of law. They don't like how we prove they're crime victims. They would rather wallow in their own misery. And my friend Bo said it the best. she said these people are in these groups online and they're just talking to each other and comparing symptoms, but nobody's paying any attention to them whatsoever. They're just talking, talking in circles. And this has been going on for almost 30 years now. Since 1988, 1989 was when the California and the LDA was formed, and they've done nothing but obstruct our progress. And you can see how they do it. They sent out a flyer recently to people's homes, and they said, "Oh, we were in this meeting and that meeting, and all these people were there, and we talked about our data." Well, that doesn't mean that those people, those scientists, or President Obama, either gives a shit or believes that this so-called big data project that you have is real. It's not. It's nonsense. So they seductively present as if they have all of this approval by these big shots, but they have no clue what they're talking about and have never presented any of this scientific evidence to the people they're allegedly working with to write Lyme bills, such as Chris Smith. So what exactly is their agenda? It's certainly not to move forward. That's going to be all up to you. So we have this platform. We have a couple of groups. The main one is called Occupy Justice, and we have criminal charge sheets that break down the Lyme disease crime and give the history and explain about biofilms. No, they're not a contributor. And explain about bacteriophage vector DNA, which is simply how spirochetes acquire new DNA to make them more virulent, i.e. can invade more different types of species, because this plasmid DNA, a lot of it, we don't know what all the plasmid DNA codes for, but we know a lot of it codes for ligands or something that will help the spirochete attach to tissue. Because after all, spirochetes are a parasite, which means they need something from you, the host, and the main thing we know they need is lipids, because they can't synthesize any of their own lipids. I guess they mainly are after cholesterol and so forth. So what they do is they attach to your cells, all of which have lipids in their membranes, and then they have little porin type barrel-shaped molecules in which they export and import the nutrients that they need. So that's how they cause disease. But they also cause disease because they then shed these outer surface proteins, or these plasmid-derived lipoproteins or surface antigens that help them adhere to various types of tissue when under antibody attack or in a harsh system for them, such as a serum-free or a blood cell-free culture. They revert to a spheroplast or a cyst form. So the way they cause disease is mainly by shedding these outer surface proteins, which are lipoproteins, which are fungal-ish. That is, they are managed by toll-like receptors 2 and 1. And CD14, yes. And those are toxic to the body. The body perceives that they are in a toxic shock-like environment and then shuts its immune system down. Being injected with Lymerix is very similar to taking bathroom scum off of your exactly similar to taking scum off of your bathroom and putting it in a needle and injecting it into your bloodstream. And they knew this. They knew that it was toxic for at least 15%, if not more, and that's why they had planned on trashing all these Lyme and Lymerix victims the whole time. We know from 1993, Alan Barber and Derlin Fish published an article called it something like The Social Consequences of Lyme Disease, in which they straight up made fun of everybody who complained of a chronic fatiguing illness. But they also admitted that the phase 1 and phase 2 trials of the OSPE vaccines were underway. So 1993 is when they put that report out, and 1994 is when they committed the Dearborn fraud. So in other words, they knew that that vaccine was causing trouble, and that's why they wrote that chronic neurologic, chronic fatiguing definition, chronic post-sepsis disease description out of the Dearborn case definition and said, oh no, you only have Lyme disease if you have a solitary arthritis or a monoarticular arthritis in a joint that goes away on its own after 4 years and doesn't need any treatment. Completely ridiculous. You all know from 500 years of syphilis how interesting that was. It got the name Great Imitator because it caused so many other outcomes. Lyme was called a new Great Imitator. Borrelia spirochetes are far more virulent than human spirochetes that humans share with each other because they're infectious for all kinds of critters, and they're mutating. That is, they're acquiring new plasmids. new plasmid DNA faster. And so if syphilis was a great imitator that caused lupus, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, dementia, blah, 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 how is it possible that the new great imitator, which is more virulent, which is Borrelia based, how could that be a non-disease that just causes bad knees? So you know that this is obviously a fraud case. We know who did it. We know why they did it. The ALDF, or the American Lyme Disease Foundation, was founded in 1990. That was soon after the Dole-By Act, where it was permissible to own DNA and thereby own diagnoses of diseases and completely control them, which is what they were trying to do with this gang. The ALDF was trying to do with vector-borne disease. The ALDF staff, it's ALDF.com, and it's supposedly a non-profit, so you would think it would be a .org, but it's made up of members of the CDC and this criminal gang. Barbara Johnson, Alan Barber, Robert Schoen, Alan Steer, Daniel Ron, all the crooks, Siegel, all these guys, the same guys who own patents, in order to promote their own view of vector-borne diseases, which is based on the sale of their potential tick-borne diseases products. And meanwhile, almost all tick-borne diseases, if they're not viruses, are bearers of these fungal antigens. Ticks are cesspools of disease. You're bitten by a tick, it's very similar to being stuck with, swine lagoon gunk. That's what they mean, and they mean that literally. All new kinds of infections and all kinds of mycoplasma, and anything. So all these other vector-borne diseases that are not viruses are also fungal. So how in the world did the ALDF think they were going to have an enterprise, and they use that term, the entrepreneurial trio, they call themselves, the original Wormser and I forget who else, Derlin Fish. How in the world could they make an entire enterprise based on vector-borne diseases, test kits, and vaccines if most of them are bearers of fungal antigens? Whole idea was ridiculous. And this was not exactly put together by the smartest people in the world. I mean, Edward McSwegan never really even worked in a lab. Derlin Fish was a Connecticut restaurant inspector. He was an insect man. These are not Oppenheimer, Einstein class. These are thugs. They are lowlives. They got caught. I didn't think they'd get caught. And it's really going to be up to the patients to bring this all forward, because you can't rely on the media. They're not mentally competent to it. These journalists have in their mind first that they are super intelligent human beings and a cut above everyone else. And the doctors don't have any interest in it. They drink the Kool-Aid. If they're not the LMDs, I mean a regular doctor, they're just public health drones. They do what the insurance companies and Big Pharma tell them to do, and they protect themselves in this little MD cult. So they're never going to step out of that cult. If it comes out of the CDC, yes, Lyme is a chronic neurologic illness, and Lyme is really post-septic shock syndrome, then they'll believe it. But they can't really think outside their little box. Don't forget, most of them don't even have any science training. They just have an undergraduate degree in like music or philosophy or debating or something. And then the LLMDs and the nonprofits, they have no interest whatsoever in coming forward with this information, because all along they were thinking of one excuse after another for why antibiotics fail. And we're telling you the science says this because it's not a disease process that's cured by antibiotics. It's post-sepsis, which is about reactivated viral infections, and there's no way to fix this fact that these, what Nicole Baumgarth and Stephen Bartold came out with a couple years ago, there's no way to fix this fact that spirochetes live in the lymph nodes and bone marrow, which is where your immune cells are formed. They're not, for example, B cells come from the bone marrow, but they go to the lymph nodes to mature or to become specialized. So your immune system is completely wrecked, and these spirochetes harbor in the place exactly where these immune cells are supposed to be, refined, and they're there permanently. There's no getting rid of them. And so, not only that, this endotoxin tolerance from TLR2/1 agonists, or this fungal antigen tolerance, spreads to non-fungal type antigens, to TLR2 agonists, such as such as the lipopolysaccharide from typical bacteria. It spreads to tolerance against flagellin. It spreads to tolerance against, which is TLR5. Tolerance against viral infections. So the tolerance, that the immune system tolerance, which means your body no longer sees those infections, spreads to from fungal type like OSPE, or the shed lipoproteins of Borrelia, to viruses and all kinds of all these other kinds of infections. So your immune system is completely incompetent. You have damage to gut immunity. You have damage to the blood-brain barrier. You have like a leaky brain and a leaky gut. That's post-sepsis. That's the real deal. So anybody who's telling you they can cure Lyme doesn't know what it is. And so at the very least, what we hope from activism to get these crimes prosecuted is that you will see fewer of these types of cases, or fewer of these types of cases in the future where the people are abused on top of being sick. In other words, like everybody with chronic fatigue, Gulf War illness, and Lyme have experienced, you're not sick, you're just crazy. They deny you disability. They call you all kinds of names. You lose all your friends. You have no financial support. Many are homeless. People are dying right and left. This year, 2016, we lost a lot of people. It was an extraordinary amount. Everyone noticed it too. There were a lot of people who died in their 40s and early 50s and so forth. And that's what's going to happen. Bad enough you have to be sick, but why should you be persecuted too? You should be at least supported, and this is this thing we want going forward. If these people have been bitten by a tick or exposed to some other chronic fatiguing illness-producing event, some sepsis event, or vaccine damage in any way, those people need to be taken care of, and they shouldn't be kicked to the curb. And this is the thing we have to fix. No more homeless people with Lyme who are desperately ill and have nowhere to go. No more spousal abuse. Over and over again, we see the husbands kicking the wives out because they're no use to the husbands anymore. They're sick. They have to be taken care of. So, they get the boot and a fight and all this stress on top of being sick. No financial support, nowhere to go, bouncing from place to place. Teachers in schools giving the parents a hard time for having sick children. Parents not knowing what they should be doing, although children do tend to do better than adults, probably because they're still growing. They've got the benefit of human growth hormone, so that causes a lot of tissue repair. Can causes tissue repair. So the thing that we have to do going forward is to get this prosecuted. And that's only going to come about if we have a patient pitchfork army. You have to know what disease you have. You have to know what crimes government officials committed. You have to know why they do it. Why are they covering this up? You have to be armed with that material. And do not expect any kind of a hero or celeb or doctor to come forward, because they have had their shot. For the last 20 years, this science has been out there. When I testified in front of the FDA in January of 2001, there was some data out there that said Lyme and Lymerix cause immunosuppression. It was by Mario Philippe in the beginning and some other people. And it turns out Gary Wormser himself published this in the year 2000. And so there's really no excuse for the last 15 years for anyone, any scientist, any doctor to have picked this up and said, hey, wait a minute, and led that campaign. But none did. The ILADS doctors all tried to capitalize and squeeze the last bit of money out of people. They only see rich patients. I don't know what the latest amount is, but it's certainly exceeding $1,500 to just walk in their door. Then they order lab tests for you. You can't be sick unless you're rich. And that's the help that these so-called doctors have given us. So you can write them off too. Journalists, the same thing. New York Times, the Washington Post have had plenty of opportunity to tell this story, even when Senator Blumenthal sued them. Excuse me, in 2006, sued the gang for antitrust. Now, he would have sued them, he would have criminally charged them, but he had lamented that there is no criminal antitrust statute on the Connecticut books, so he had to sue them civilly. So he didn't then therefore he was not able to go into their offices and take all the data he wanted, proving that they knew they were lying. He wasn't able to physically go in there and grab all their computers and all their old publications to prove that this was a cabal and they were deliberately lying. He subpoenaed that information, and they never answered him. I gave him some of that information, proving they were lying. But in any event, that was as close as anyone came to, throwing them all in jail. We just didn't have a Connecticut criminal statute for racketeering like this. And so, he got no help from ILADS. ILADS didn't have the mental capacity to explain to Mr. Blumenthal, hey, this is fraud. Dearborn was a lie. Here's what really happened. There wasn't a single one in that team who was able to show him or to be able to testify against them saying, no, they committed fraud. So forget the doctors. There's not going to be any doctors. There's not going to be any celebrities. There's not going to be any whining. You are not going to win by talking about how sick you are. We've been doing that for the past 30 years. It doesn't work. No one cares. You have to prove crime, and you have to show exactly what you want prosecuted, and it has to come from the patients. This has to be a pitchfork movement because everybody else has some interest in abusing you, being a parasite on your misery. So in 2017, I hope that people can finally realize this is on them. This has to be a pitchfork movement, mom and dad, sisters and brothers. Patience yourselves. If you can get to Washington this year, we're hoping for late May, early June, that'll be great. But we'll be in touch in the meantime, and you know who we are. Signing off.